Welcome to Conversations Live. For more than a decade, we've brought you the best in books, entertainment, celebrity interviews, and current events. When the movers and shakers of the world have something to say to you, they say it to us first. Here's your host, Cyrus Webb.
Welcome back, everyone, to Conversations Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. But for a radio audience tuning in at WYAD 94.1 FM and WYADonline.com, we're glad that you all can be with us. Also tuning in to our friends at iHeartRadio and Amazon Music Podcast. We're glad you all could be with us as well. We're excited to welcome author Daniel Jose Older to our broadcast today to talk to us not only about his love of storytelling, but also the success of his book, Ballad and Dagger. Many of you guys got to know him for that. But his newest book out this week is called Last Canto of the Dead. We'll talk to Daniel not only about what it's been like for him to weave together these worlds, but also to see the way that his characters are resonating with readers of all ages. Daniel, thank you again for the time. Glad to have you on the broadcast.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here. Thank you for that great introduction.
Oh, man, appreciate it. So, look, man, I've been looking forward to this conversation with you. For those of us who are fans of Ballad and Dagger, of course, we've gotten to kind of see the worlds you've created. But, Daniel, could you have imagined when you kind of created these characters that they would have latched on to readers of all ages the way that they have?
No, it's incredible to behold. So many people have just told me that they see themselves in this book, that they found a home in this book. And, you know, that's the best thing you can say to a writer. Like, reviews and accolades are awesome, but really talking to readers who have just really, like, tapped into the mythology, to the world. And this is a fantasy book, you know, but I think fantasy speaks to people on this very deep level that they still can find home in it. And that's such an honor to be a part of.
And Daniel, I think, too, like with Last Canto of the Dead, of course, I had a chance to get an early reader copy. And what I thought was so interesting is that you bring up an interesting point. It is a fantasy, but I think it's also aspirational. I think especially for young people to want to see themselves as individuals who are strong, able to make a difference and make an impact. Is that kind of part of your hope, that you're not only able to entertain, but also to encourage young people to think even outside their circumstances?
Exactly that. I mean, you said it perfectly. It's about looking at the world around you and trying to understand what your role in it is, you know, who you are in the world. And I think that's true of young people everywhere. No matter who you are, what your background is, you're always trying, especially in those adolescent years, trying to figure out how you fit into this world. And especially now when the world is in so much turmoil and there's so much bad news, and it's really hard to find light in that. But that's what we all have to do, and that's what young people, I think, especially struggle to do. So, you know, we meet Mateo, who is this 16-year-old piano prodigy, and he has to tap into these healing powers as this ancient evil is rising in his community from the shadowy history of their magical lost island. And he has a crush on this girl who just murdered someone right in front of him, right? So there's elements of magic and murder and everything else, but it's really about a boy, and then in the second book, a girl, too, trying to find their way through the world.
Yeah, and realizing, for one, I think even when you feel alone, right, that you don't have to be alone, you know, that you can be able to align yourself. So I want to talk about how this all began for you, Daniel. When did you know? When did you know that storytelling was something that you wanted to do?
You know, it was always storytelling on some level. When I was a kid, I was that kid that always had a pad of paper and a pen, and I was always drawing cartoons. And I just took it everywhere I went. But those cartoons had stories behind them. Every single one of them, you know, I could have told you all the different weird worlds that they were about and everything else. In my 20s, it was music. And so I was working as a paramedic on the ambulance in New York City, and I was doing music on the side. And I loved doing that. But at the end of the day, what it came back to was storytelling. Whether it was through song or through cartoons or finally through words on the page. And that really ended up being what I honed in on as like, this is what I'm going to do, and this is going to be the central focus of my life. And I love it. I've been doing it ever since, and it's really where my heart is.
Yeah, and now, of course, you're able to share that with all of us. The other interesting thing I think about with Last Canto of the Dead, as well as with Ballad and Dagger, Daniel, you give us something interesting to think about, and I'm going to mention it about the characters, but ask you about yourself personally, because they, as you just alluded to, they have gifts, but they're not always gifts that they trust. Have you always trusted your gift as a storyteller? Have you always trusted that if you used it, that it would be able to have the power that it's having?
Man, what a great question. You know, I think a lot about that very thing. I think we have a tremendous responsibility as storytellers. And so while on the one hand, I do feel there's a moment when you're writing a story where you lock into it, and usually a series of moments, and And those moments are surrounded by like seas of moments of totally feeling adrift and not knowing if it's working or not. And you're constantly negotiating, like trying to get to the next moment where it makes sense. And sometimes it's a huge act of faith to just keep going and figure out if the pieces are going to fit together. And sometimes they don't, right? So that's always inherent to the process. I think on another level, storytelling feels like a first language, and it's one I'm very comfortable in, and I just have always loved. And then finally, like I said, we stories change the world, like hands down, period, end of the line. Like that's the truth. The stories are the most powerful thing in the world. Politicians know it, marketing people know it, and certainly writers have to know it. And I think we have to take that very seriously, because something that can change the world and make it better can also make it worse. So that's where the responsibility piece comes in, and that's not always easy, but it is the reality that we face, and I think it's a great thing to embrace if we look at it head on and don't try to pretend that like, oh, whatever, I'm just putting some silly story out in the world. No, you're changing lives, and you have to deal with that so that you don't change them and send them down a negative spiral.
Exactly. And I think that, again, is a great lead-in to Last Canto of the Dead. So for yourself, when this first began, I mean, this particular book in this series, as we kind of look at even Ballad and Dagger, I want to talk about for yourself the evolution, because we do see an evolution, of course, in the worlds that you created, but also what about yourself as an evolution as a storyteller? I mean, did you feel any extra pressure going from Ballad to this book?
Oh, man. Yeah, absolutely. I would say every project, every book, you know, it has its own life, and it's alive in a different way. And as such, it demands its own process. So you might think, you know, and this is, Last Canto is my 19th book, which is wild. But every single one has been different, and it's taught me how to be human in a different way, and of course how to be a writer in a different way. So as an example, this is Outlaw Saints is a perfect example as a series. Ballad and Dagger is a book that I outlined. I had outlines of my outlines. I had rough drafts of my outlines. I mean, I just worked them into the ground. I drew pictures. I had storyboards. I went to town. And that was that process that it demanded. And when I got to Last Canto, it's a very different story, and it's just as complex with just as much world building and depth, and in fact, two narrators, right? So there's a lot there, but I knew instinctively that it wasn't a book that I could outline, and I really just had to jump in and let the story guide me and follow it where it would, and that's what I did, which was hard. But again, it grew me as a writer, it grew me as a person.
So that brings up this question. I'm glad you mentioned that. So which character surprised you the most? You don't have to give anything away, of course, but what characters you were kind of seeing then Last Canto kind of unfold, which character surprised you the most?
Oh, yeah. Well, definitely Chayla, right? So Chayla's the love interest in Ballad and Dagger, and I certainly set out very intentionally to make sure she wasn't just a flat, like, pretty face, you know, love interest type character. She needed to really have a life and a history of her own. And that was something I really had in the forefront of my mind writing her initially. And she did. She came to life for me fully. And to the point that when I finished the book, I realized when I was going to write the sequel, she really needed her own point of view section. So the sequel, Last Canto of the Dead, jumps back and forth between Mateo's story and Chayla's story. And as they're telling it, and Chayla's deeply, deeply connected to the island of San Madrigal, so she's able to walk through its history in a kind of mystical way to understand what happened and how we got here better. And she some of that I knew and some of that I found out, but she, by leaps and bounds, just, you know, really took a life of her own and became who she is as I was writing her.
Yeah. I love the fact, I will say this, and this isn't spoiling anything, but I love the fact that, you know, we all have heard the cliche or the saying about being stronger together. Each one of them, of course, has their own ability and power, but definitely realizing they're stronger together. And I think it says a lot for the reader, especially young readers, about how important it is for us to come together to be able to see what we can be able to do together. Last thing I want to ask you about, Daniel, and again, I appreciate the time. So excited for you and our audience to read the book this week as it's releasing for our audience.
Thank you so much.
I want to ask you about your advice, because I'm sure you get this question all the time, but what do you normally say to people about who people feel as though they have a story in them that they want to tell? What advice do you normally give them?
Oh, great question. You know, there's a poem I always come back to. It's by a poet named Antonio Machado. And the poem says, Caminante no hay camino, se hace camino andas, which means, walker, there is no path. You make the road by walking it. And I love that so much for life, for writing, for, you know, whatever art form you practice. it's so true. We get so caught up in looking for a path, and the truth is we are making the path as we walk. Even the process of looking for one is making one. And remembering that, it's almost like you can let out a breath, because you cannot be lost if there is no path. You just have to make that path. You have to have a machete, and you got to chop. And that's a beautiful and terrifying process, I think, to really give over to and accept. But that's the process, whether we like it or not. And so, it doesn't mean don't study, the great masters, and don't look at your role models, for sure. But look at them with a critical eye and understand that whatever it's going to be what you do is going to get you where you're going.
Great message. That's a great reminder. Again, everyone, we've been speaking with Daniel Jose Older. He's celebrating his brand new book this week, Left Canto of the Dead. Depending on how you guys are listening to us, it is releasing this week, so you guys can, of course, get it through our friends at Amazon.com or through your favorite local bookstore as well. Daniel, how can our audience stay connected with you, man?
The best way is my website. It's danieljoseolder.net. Up there, you can find all my new books coming out. I have a bunch of Star Wars work, comic books that are on the way. And there's also writing classes that I have posted online. If you're interested in writing, that's a great way to start. And a blog from back when I was a medic, which is kind of how I started writing, was telling the stories on the ambulance.
Awesome. Daniel, again, congratulations to you, man. Really appreciate the time, and looking forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you so much. Man, it's been wonderful talking to you. Let's do it again.
All right, then. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live. Until next time, I'm your host, Cyrus Webb, saying as always, enjoy your day, enjoy your life, enjoy your world. Thank you all for choosing Conversations Live, and let's go make today amazing. Take care.